Preface. Ethereal Hollywood is a world reconfigured from the golden age of Hollywood, where the legendary stars are not just memories, but immortal archetypes, still living in their own parallel alternative reality. Familiar history is not duplicated but flexible and constantly revisioning itself along diverse pathways. Time and space are also more fluid and less binding. And what has been called magic works in odd and unusual ways, producing scenarios from the silly to the surreal. And since these stories are in an alternative world or dimension, there are variances from real-world facts, such as the relationship between characters, studios, events. This is a fluid world where history flows in unexpected directions. These are audiobooks with imagery synced to the narrative as much as possible, serving as quasi-storyboards to give a rough visual dimension to the stories. Book 8 of the Ethereal Hollywood series. Elvis Presley, King of the Silent Screen. By Arnold Kalnitsky. Damn things stuck again. John Barrymore jabbed a finger at the projector jammed mid-reel. Dust motes danced in the beam slicing through his dim screening room. A young man shifted behind him, clearing his throat. Sir. Mr. Lasky said you'd see me about acting. The voice held a thick southern drawl, unfamiliar against the velvet-lined walls. Barrymore turned. The kid looked like a lost truck driver, pompadour hair stiff with grease, gold lame shirt straining over broad shoulders. Ridiculous. Yet something raw flickered in his eyes beneath the nervousness. Hunger. Barrymore wiped oil from his hands onto a rag. Can you move without looking like a sack of potatoes? Elvis swallowed. I can move. He demonstrated an awkward hip roll, more stumble than swagger. Silence stretched. Barrymore studied him. The cheap fabric, the trembling hands, the sheer, untamed potential radiating off him like heat. Ever seen a silent picture? No, sir. Elvis shifted his weight. Back home, we got the drive-in. Singin' cowboys mostly. Barrymore snorted. Singing. He gestured sharply at the frozen image on screen, a woman weeping soundlessly. That's acting. Every flicker of an eyelash screams louder than a goddamn opera. He snatched a grease pencil from the projector. Your hips won't save you here, boy. Your face will. He drew two crude circles on the dusty screen over the actress's eyes. These are your weapons now. Elvis stared at the smudged circles. The projector whirred back to life, bathing him in flickering light. The actress's silent sob filled the room. He touched his own cheekbone, fingers tracing the bone beneath skin. Barrymore watched, hawk-like. The hunger in Elvis's eyes sharpened, focused. He didn't blink. Barrymore shoved a script fragment at him, a single typed page. Read it. With your eyes. Then show me. The scene was simple. A man discovering betrayal. Elvis scanned the words, lips moving silently over phrases like, cold steel, and, shattered trust. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and when they snapped open, the raw hurt was startlingly real. His shoulders slumped. A tremor ran through his jaw. No words. Just a slow, devastating crumpling of hope etched onto his face. Barrymore grunted approval. Less truck driver. More shattered man. The next week was a blur of grease paint and harsh lights. Barrymore drilled him relentlessly. Smaller. Smaller. He'd bark as Elvis practiced subtle shifts. A tightening of the lips at bad news, the slight widening of eyes at surprise. They worked in Barrymore's cluttered study, surrounded by dusty scripts and framed portraits of forgotten stars. Elvis learned stillness. He learned how a single tear, held trembling on the lid before falling, could silence a room. He learned his hips were useless. His eyes were everything. The gold lame shirt stayed folded away. One crisp Tuesday, Barrymore tossed him a silk scarf. Wrap that ridiculous neck. "We're going out." They drove to a vast, manicured estate overlooking the ocean. Hearst Castle. As they walked through towering archways, Barrymore muttered, "Smile like you own the place." But silently. Inside, a glittering party pulsed. Flappers, tycoons, starlets. Randolph Hearst himself, thick-necked and watchful, stood near a roaring fireplace. Barrymore propelled Elvis forward. "Mr. Hearst, allow me to present a revelation." Elvis met Hearst's appraising gaze. He didn't speak. He offered a slow, enigmatic smile, eyes holding a glint of something untamed beneath the practiced stillness. The room seemed to hush, just for a moment. A socialite nearby, draped in pearls, leaned towards her companion, whispering, "Who is that beautiful, silent boy?" The silent films began trickling out. Whispers of Memphis, the stillness after midnight. Elvis played brooding drivers, lost poets, lovers who communicated only through aching glances. The flickering images captivated audiences. His face, projected 20 feet tall, became a phenomenon. Women sighed over his smoldering close-ups. Men envied the raw, wordless intensity. He attended premieres flanked by Barrymore, navigating flashbulbs with a practiced, distant grace. At Hearst's next soirée, Marion Davies herself pressed a champagne flute into his hand, her fingers lingering. He raised the glass in a silent toast, his eyes meeting hers with a look that promised everything and nothing. She laughed, throaty and delighted. He didn't utter a word. The silence became his signature, his mystique. He learned to dance the Charleston with manicured starlets, his movements sharp and precise, conveying joy through his body while his lips remained sealed. Gossip columns christened him the Velvet Ghost. One humid night, filming a lakeside scene under arc lights, the director yelled, "Cut!" Frustration crackled. The actress opposite Elvis, a seasoned silent star, snapped, "It's impossible. He gives me nothing back." Barrymore, watching from the shadows, stepped forward. He didn't defend Elvis. Instead, he turned to the actress, his voice low and cutting. "You're waiting for words that won't come. Look at his hands." The camera rolled again. Elvis, reacting to her character's accusation, didn't just look wounded. His fingers curled slowly into fists, knuckles white, then released in a gesture of heartbreaking resignation. The actress gasped, her own reaction suddenly genuine, raw. The director whispered, "Print it." Barrymore offered Elvis the faintest nod. The lesson was learned. Silence wasn't emptiness, it was profound communication. The invitations multiplied. Weekends at San Simeon blurred into dizzying stretches. He found himself on a yacht owned by a steel magnate, the Pacific wind whipping his hair. A famous novelist's wife, known for her sharp wit and sharper beauty, cornered him near the polished teak railing. Moonlight silvered her cheekbones. She spoke of Paris, of art, her words a rapid, glittering stream. Elvis listened, his gaze fixed on the churning wake below. He felt the weight of her expectation, the pressure to respond. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his eyes to hers. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked, pouring every ounce of the longing, the confusion, the thrilling terror of his ascent into that single, sustained glance. Her breath caught. She reached out, fingertips brushing his silent lips. "My God," she murmured, "you speak volumes." He leaned in, the roar of the ocean. Backlot life became a stark contrast. Between Hearst's opulent gardens and the novelist's yacht, Elvis spent hours sweating under hot studio lights. Barrymore remained a relentless taskmaster. Too broad. He'd bark during a rehearsal for a courtroom drama. "You're telegraphing guilt like a neon sign. Internalize it." He jabbed a finger at Elvis's chest. The jury isn't deaf. They're blind to everything but your face. Make them feel the doubt creeping in. They worked on micro-expressions. The infinitesimal flicker of doubt crossing his eyes before resolve hardened his jaw, the subtle tremor in his clasped hands betraying calm posture. The gold lame felt like a costume from another lifetime. The premiere of Flickering Heart was pandemonium. Crowds choked Hollywood Boulevard, screaming his name. Flash bulbs exploded like miniature suns. Inside Grauman's Chinese theater, Barrymore guided him past a gauntlet of tuxedos and shimmering gowns. He saw Hearst nodding approvingly, Marion Davies waving a gloved hand. He saw the novelist's wife watching him from the shadows of a box seat, her expression unreadable. As the lights dimmed and the first frames flickered to life, his own face, 20 feet tall, etched with silent anguish, a profound stillness settled over the vast auditorium. The only sound was the projector's rhythmic clatter. He felt the collective intake of breath, the shared tension. He didn't need to hear the applause later. He saw it reflected in Barrymore's rare, genuine smile. Later, escaping the crush of the after-party, Elvis found himself on a secluded balcony overlooking the glittering city. The cool night air was a relief. He leaned against the stone railing, the distant hum of celebration a faint buzz. He touched his throat, a familiar gesture now. The silence wasn't just a technique anymore, it was his world. He thought of the truck driver from Memphis, the roar of engines, the twang of a guitar. It felt like a dream belonging to someone else. Below, Los Angeles pulsed with light and possibility, a silent movie writ large. He closed his eyes, listening to the quiet within. The balcony door clicked open softly behind him. He didn't turn. He knew the scent of Chanel No. 5 before she spoke. "They adore you," came the novelist's wife's voice, husky and close. "Your beautiful silence." He felt her warmth against his back, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He remained perfectly still, staring out at the city, the silence stretching taut between them, charged with everything unsaid. Barrymore found him the next morning sprawled on a chaise longue in the cavernous Hearst Library, sunlight streaming through towering windows. Dust motes danced in the beams, illuminating shelves crammed with unread volumes. "Recovering from your triumphs?" Barrymore rasped, pouring himself a stiff brandy despite the hour. He tossed a crumpled newspaper onto Elvis's lap. The headline screamed, "Velvet Ghost Haunts Hearts." Below it, a photo captured him dancing with Marion Davies, his expression inscrutable. Barrymore jabbed a finger at the image. "See that? Too damned enigmatic. They'll pin whatever fantasy they want on it. Dangerous." He paced, swirling the amber liquid. "You need layers, boy. Nuance beyond the smolder. We start Chaplin today. Pathos. Humor born of desperation. Can you find the funny in the ache?" Elvis picked up the paper, studying his own frozen face. He nodded slowly, the weight of Barrymore's challenge settling on him. The Chaplin study was brutal. Barrymore had him pratfalling across the polished ballroom floor until his knees were bruised, trying to master the little tramp's blend of dignity and disaster. "Not clumsy," Barrymore barked, perched on a gilded chair like a disapproving emperor. "Unlucky. There's a difference. Make me feel for the stumble." Exhausted, Elvis attempted a sequence. Checking a pocket watch that wasn't there, tripping over an imaginary curb, then trying to tip a non-existent hat to a phantom lady. He landed hard. Barrymore sighed. Hopeless. Like watching a bull in a china shop trying ballet. Deflated, Elvis sat up, rubbing his elbow. He caught his reflection in a massive gilt-framed mirror, the pompadour slightly askew, a smudge of dirt on his cheek, eyes wide with frustration. Suddenly, a genuine, self-deprecating grin cracked his face. Barrymore froze mid-sip. There, he hissed, pointing. That. Hold on to that flicker. That's gold. Elvis stared at his own grinning reflection, startled. The ache could be funny. News of the chaplain training spread like wildfire through the Hearst set. That evening, during a casual croquet match on the sun-drenched West Terrace, Randolph Hearst himself boomed, "Heard Barrymore's turning you into a clown, Presley." Marion Davies giggled, leaning on her mallet. The novelist's wife watched intently from a shaded wicker chair, a book forgotten in her lap. Elvis, lining up a shot, felt the weight of their stares. He didn't speak. Instead, he executed a perfect, exaggerated pantomime, squinting fiercely at the wicket, miming intense calculation, then swinging his mallet with ludicrous, chaplain-esque flourish, only to tap the ball a bare inch. He froze in mock horror, hand flying to his forehead in despair. The silence held for a beat, then shattered as Hearst roared with laughter. Marion dissolved into giggles, and even the novelist's wife covered her mouth, her eyes sparkling. Elvis straightened, meeting Barrymore's gaze across the lawn. The old actor gave an almost imperceptible nod. The velvet ghost had found a new shade. Later, escaping the lingering twilight chatter, Elvis wandered the castle's dimly lit hallways. He paused before a suit of armor, its polished surface reflecting the flickering sconce light. He saw his own distorted image, the sharp cheekbones, the intense eyes, the stillness he'd cultivated. He touched his throat again, the habitual gesture grounding him. The silence wasn't just a performance anymore. It was the air he breathed, the lens through which he experienced the roaring, noisy world. He thought of Graceland's porch swing, the cicadas, drone, the easy rumble of conversation, sounds belonging to a ghost he used to be. The polished metal showed only the silent star Hearst's world adored. A faint scent of Chanel drifted on the cool air current. He didn't turn. The novelist's wife quietly drifted beside him, silent as he was. She studied his reflection in the armor, her own face pale and serious in the distorted metal. "They laugh," she murmured, her voice barely disturbing the quiet, "but they don't see the cost, do they?" Locked in that beautiful face. She reached out, her fingers hovering near the cold steel breastplate, mirroring where his heart would be. "What happens," she whispered, leaning closer, her breath warm against his ear, "when the silence becomes a cage?" Her question hung in the air, sharp and unsettling, cutting through the practiced stillness he wore like armor. He felt the echo of her words vibrate deep within his chest, a tremor beneath the perfect control. Barrymore found him an hour later, not in the library or the screening room, but standing alone on the Neptune pool terrace under a canopy of stars. The vast, illuminated pool shimmered below, casting dancing reflections on the colonnade. Elvis wasn't gazing at the water or the stars. He was staring at his own hands, turning them over slowly in the moonlight as if seeing them for the first time, the tools of his silent trade. Barrymore approached quietly, the gravel crunching softly under his shoes. He didn't offer brandy or a script. He simply stood beside him, following his gaze to those expressive hands. The silence between them now was different, heavy with the novelist's wife's question and the unspoken weight of the path ahead. Barrymore cleared his throat, a low, gravelly sound in the vast quiet. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice stripped of its usual theatricality, raw and direct, "we start on Keaton. Stone face. Iron heart. Find the earthquake behind the eyes." He paused, letting the challenge settle. "Can you tremble, without moving a muscle?" The transition was jarring. From Chaplin's flailing pathos to Keaton's immovable stoicism felt like shifting tectonic plates. Barrymore locked Elvis in a straight-backed chair in the cavernous castle billiards room. "Stillness is power," he commanded, circling him like a sculptor assessing marble. Not vacancy. Contained fury. Suppressed joy. Buried sorrow. Let it simmer behind the mask. He placed a single, wilting rose on the green felt table before Elvis. "She betrayed you. With your best friend. You just found the rose he gave her tucked in your book." Elvis stared at the flower, the velvety petals already browning at the edges. Minutes ticked by. Barrymore watched. Hawk-like, for any betraying twitch. A flicker of the eyelid, a tightening of the jaw. Elvis remained statue still, only his eyes alive, fixed on the dying bloom. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a profound desolation seeped into those blue depths, a silent howl trapped behind an impassive face. Barrymore grunted, a sound of pure satisfaction. "Now that," he rasped, "is a tremor." The novelist's wife sought him out that evening. She found him not at the glittering dinner, but sitting alone on a stone bench in the shadowed, fragrant depths of the castle's private garden. The scent of night-blooming jasmine hung thick in the air. She sat beside him, the silk of her gown whispering against the stone. She didn't mention cages or silence. Instead, she reached into her small beaded bag and pulled out a slim, leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. She placed them gently on the bench between them. Her eyes, dark and knowing in the moonlight, met his. She didn't speak. She simply tilted her head slightly towards the notebook, an invitation as potent as any whispered word. The unspoken offer hung in the jasmine-scented air. "If you cannot speak, then write. Tell me." Elvis looked at the notebook, then back at her face, his Keaton-trained stillness flawless, yet within, the earthquake raged. He did not reach for the pen. The premiere of Stoneface Serenade was unlike any before. The Grauman's Chinese marquee blazed, the crowds roared, but a new tension crackled beneath the usual frenzy. Gossip columns had feasted on whispered sightings of the Velvet Ghost and the brilliant novelist's wife, the silent star and the woman of devastating words. Flashbulbs exploded as Elvis stepped from the limousine, Barrymore a watchful shadow at his elbow. He moved through the gauntlet with his perfected, distant grace, the Keaton stillness radiating an almost dangerous calm. Inside, the air hummed. He saw Hare's speculative glance, Marion Davies's curious pout. And then he saw her, seated beside her husband in a box draped in velvet. She wore emeralds that glittered like cold fire. Their eyes met across the hushed, expectant auditorium. He offered no smile, no flicker of recognition, just the profound, contained stillness Barrymore had forged. The lights dimmed. The projector clattered to life. His face filled the screen, a monument of silent endurance, the earthquake perfectly hidden behind a movable stone. The novelist's wife leaned forward, her gaze locked on the giant, silent image, her expression utterly unreadable. The silence wasn't just on the screen, it engulfed the entire theater, thick and charged. After the final, devastatingly still frame faded to black, the applause was thunderous, but it felt distant to Elvis. He navigated the crush of the after-party at the Ambassador Hotel, a silent island in a sea of noise. Champagne flutes were thrust into his hand, congratulations buzzed around him, but his senses were tuned to a single frequency. He felt her presence before he saw her, a shift in the air near the grand piano. She stood alone, momentarily separated from her husband, swirling the dregs of her drink. The emeralds caught the light, casting sharp green reflections. He approached, drawn by an invisible thread. They stood inches apart, surrounded by the roar of celebration, yet locked in their own profound quiet. She lifted her eyes to his. The unspoken question from the garden bench hung between them. amplified by the flickering image they'd just witnessed. He saw the challenge, the invitation, and something deeper, a raw vulnerability she usually masked with wit. His hand, resting loosely at his side, twitched almost imperceptibly, the only crack in the Keaton facade. The notebook and pen felt like a phantom weight in his pocket. Barrymore materialized beside them, a brandy snifter clutched in his bony hand. His sharp eyes darted from Elvis's rigid stillness to the novelist's wife's intense, waiting gaze. He didn't greet her. Instead, he leaned close to Elvis, his voice a low, gravelly murmur meant only for his ears, yet carrying enough force to fracture the moment. "The cage," Barrymore hissed, his breath smelling of expensive tobacco and regret, "as only bars if you let it be. Remember the tremor, boy. Find your voice, or lose her." He didn't wait for a reaction. He turned abruptly, melting back into the glittering throng, leaving Elvis standing frozen before her, Barrymore's words echoing louder than any applause. The novelist's wife watched Barrymore disappear, then turned her full attention back to Elvis. Her lips parted slightly, not to speak, but as if drawing breath for something monumental. The noise of the party seemed to recede, replaced by the deafening silence of expectation. The notebook felt like a live wire against his thigh. Of Hearst's world, and the terrifying, exquisite possibility in her gaze. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, towards his jacket pocket where the slim leather notebook rested. His fingers brushed the cool leather, tracing its edge. He held her gaze, the silence stretching into an eternity contained within a single, suspended heartbeat. The tremor wasn't just behind his eyes anymore, it threatened to shatter him from within. He didn't pull out the notebook. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, poised on the precipice, the velvet ghost trembling on the edge of a word. The novelist's wife watched his hand hover near his pocket, her own breath held captive. The emeralds at her throat pulsed with the frantic beat of her heart. She saw the conflict etched into the stillness of his face, the Memphis boy fighting the silent monument Barrymore had built. The roar of the party faded to a dull, distant hum. Her lips parted again, not to speak, but to breathe his name, a silent plea forming in the charged air between them. "Elvis." The unspoken syllable hung, fragile and immense. He saw the plea in her eyes, the raw vulnerability she usually masked beneath layers of wit and social armor. It mirrored his own trapped scream. His fingers tightened imperceptibly on the notebook's edge beneath the fabric. Barrymore's gravelly warning, "Find your voice, or lose her," echoed like a gunshot in the sudden, profound quiet enveloping them. The cage bars felt cold, real, pressing in. He took a shallow breath, the first deliberate movement breaking the Keaton stone face. His jaw clenched, a muscle leaping beneath the skin. The tremor was escaping. His gaze never left hers. Slowly, deliberately, he withdrew his hand from his pocket. It was empty. The notebook remained hidden. A flicker of devastating disappointment crossed her face, quickly masked. But Elvis didn't look away. He lifted his hand, palm facing her, fingers trembling slightly. Then, with agonizing slowness, he pressed his fingertips to his own silent lips. He held them there for a long moment, his eyes locked on hers, pouring every ounce of longing, frustration, and unspeakable feeling into that single, silent gesture. It wasn't words. It wasn't writing. It was a raw, primal confession etched onto his skin, offered across the impossible gulf of his silence. Her breath hitched, a tiny, sharp sound lost in the ambassador's roar. The velvet ghost had spoken. The moment shattered as her husband appeared, a genial smile plastered on his face, clapping Elvis on the shoulder. "Marvelous work, Presley. Utterly captivating stillness." He swept her away towards a knot of publishers, her emerald gaze flashing back once, a look of bewildered understanding and lingering hurt. Elvis stood rooted, Barrymore's words echoing. Lose her. The tremor he'd mastered for Keaton now threatened to crack his ribs. He turned blindly, pushing through the crowd towards the terrace doors, the champagne flute in his hand forgotten, ice cold against his palm. Outside, the cool Los Angeles night offered no relief. He leaned heavily on the wrought iron railing, staring down at the glittering city below. The silence, once his shield, his weapon, his art, felt like a suffocating shroud. He could hear the phantom roar of Graceland crowds, the twang of a guitar string, the easy drawl of his own voice, sounds buried deeper than Hearst's Roman tiles. A single, traitorous thought surfaced. What if Barrymore built a tomb, not a throne? He closed his eyes, the tremor finally escaping, a single, silent tear tracing a hot path down his immobile cheek. The velvet ghost wept without a sound. The terrace door clicked open behind him. He didn't turn, bracing for Barrymore's critique or Hearst's booming inquiry. Instead, a familiar scent of Chanel drifted on the night air, softer now, mingled with salt spray. He felt her presence beside him, a warmth against the cool metal railing. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, shoulder almost touching his, gazing out at the same endless city lights. Her hand, pale in the moonlight, rested near his on the railing. Inches apart. Waiting. The silence between them now was different, charged, fragile, but no longer empty. It was a space filled with everything unspoken, everything impossible, and the terrifying, fragile possibility of what might come next. He didn't move his hand. He didn't look at her. He just breathed, the tremor finally settling into a deep, quiet ache. Barrymore found them there an hour later. He paused in the doorway, a gaunt silhouette against the golden light spilling from the party. His sharp eyes took in the scene. The silent star and the woman of words, side by side in the quiet dark, the city sprawling beneath them like a promise. He didn't interrupt. He didn't scoff. A rare, almost imperceptible softening touched the corners of his mouth. He watched Elvis, seeing not just the stillness he'd meticulously crafted, but the raw humanity bleeding through the cracks in the stone facade. Barrymore gave a single, slow nod, a silent benediction in the moonlight, then turned and vanished back into the roar. His unspoken message was clear. The lesson is yours now. The next morning, a sleek coupe delivered Elvis not to the familiar castle gates, but to a modest bungalow tucked into the Hollywood Hills. Sunlight streamed through eucalyptus trees. The novelist's wife opened the door herself, dressed simply, no emeralds in sight. She didn't greet him with words. She held out her hand. In her palm lay the slim leather notebook, its cover smooth and inviting. She placed it gently into his hands, her fingers brushing his, a silent question echoing in her eyes. Then she stepped back, leaving the doorway open. Inside, a typewriter sat on a desk by a sunlit window, paper already loaded. The quiet hum of the hills enveloped them. He looked down at the notebook, then back at her face. The cage door stood open. He stepped inside. The air smelled of old paper, coffee, and possibility. He walked to the desk, the notebook heavy in his hands. He ran his fingers over the blank page. He didn't sit. He didn't write. He simply stood there, the silence of the room wrapping around him. Not the silence of performance, not the silence of Hearst's grandeur, but a new, profound quiet. The velvet ghost faced the blank page, the tremor in his hands finally stilled, ready to begin. The novelist's wife watched from the doorway. She didn't offer guidance or reassurance. She leaned against the frame, sunlight catching the dust motes dancing around her. Her expression held no expectation, only a quiet, unwavering presence. She understood the magnitude of the precipice he stood upon, the leap from the silent screen to the silent page. The only sound was the distant hum of Los Angeles and the frantic beat of his own heart echoing in his ears. Slowly, deliberately, Elvis opened the notebook. He picked up the fountain pen she'd left beside the typewriter, its weight unfamiliar, significant. He stared at the stark white page. The tremor returned, subtle, confined to his fingertips. He thought of Barrymore's relentless drills, Hearst's glittering parties, Marian's laughter, the novelist's wife's piercing gaze. He thought of Graceland's humid nights and the phantom roar of crowds he'd never hear again. He pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed, black and decisive, forming a single word, Memphis. He lifted the pen. The word stood alone, stark against the white expanse. A declaration, a confession, a lifeline thrown back to the ghost he used to be. It wasn't singing. It wasn't speaking. But it was a voice. The novelist's wife smiled, a soft, knowing curve of her lips. She pushed off the doorframe and walked silently towards the kitchen, leaving him alone with the blank page, the trembling pen, and the terrifying, exhilarating echo of his own silent word. Memphis bled onto the page. Not lyrics, not melodies, but sensations. The sticky heat pressing down on Beale Street like a damp blanket, the rhythmic thump of bass bleeding through club walls, the sharp tang of barbecue smoke clinging to his clothes. He wrote about the ache in his fingers after stringing barbed wire fences under a punishing sun, the nervous sweat soaking his collar before his first real gig at the Eagle's Nest, the bewildering roar of applause that hit him like a physical wave. The pen scratched furiously, ink pooling where he hesitated, capturing the raw, unvarnished texture of a life silenced by Hearst's gilded cage. He forgot Barrymore's stillness, forgot the velvet ghost's enigmatic gaze. He was just Elvis again, pouring his stifled South onto paper. He paused, hand cramped, staring at the densely filled pages. A shadow fell across the desk. She placed a steaming mug of coffee beside him, her fingers brushing his shoulder, a silent anchor. He looked up, meeting her eyes. There was no pity, only fierce understanding. "It's raw," she murmured, her voice barely disturbing the charged quiet, like sunlight on asphalt. "Keep going." He nodded, the simple act of acknowledgement feeling profound. He turned back, dipped the pen, and plunged deeper, writing about the jarring disconnect of silent stardom, the phantom itch in his throat when Marion Davies laughed, the suffocating weight of Hearst's admiration, the electric, wordless tension beside the novelist's wife on moonlit balconies. The tremor was gone. The pen moved with steady, desperate purpose. The afternoon light slanted golden through the window when Barrymore's furious knock shattered the quiet. He barged in, face thunderous, waving a telegram. Lasky's screaming. "Hearst is demanding. You vanish after the premiere." "What is this?" His tirade died abruptly as he took in the scene. Elvis hunched over the desk, ink-stained fingers, pages covered in dents, looping script scattered like fallen leaves, the novelist's wife watching calmly from the doorway. Barrymore snatched a page, his eyes scanning the raw, vivid lines about Beale Street's pulse and the hollowness beneath Hearst's gold. He read silently, his theatrical fury draining away, replaced by a slow, dawning comprehension. He lowered the paper, his gaze shifting from the words to Elvis's face, no longer just the velvet ghost's mask, but etched with the exhaustion and exhilaration of creation. Barrymore's voice, when it finally came, was stripped bare. "Well, boy, looks like you found your earthquake." Elvis stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. The silence felt different now. Not a void, but a space humming with potential. He met Barrymore's sharp gaze. "Lasky can wait," he said, his voice rough from disuse but steady. It wasn't defiance. It was simple statement. The novelist's wife stepped forward, picking up a stray page. "It's good, John," she said quietly, her eyes holding Barrymore's. "Raw, alive, more truth than any flickering shadow on a screen." Barrymore grunted, looking back at the telegram crumpled in his fist, then at the desk strewn with Elvis's silent scream made visible. He tossed the telegram onto the typewriter. "Truth," he muttered, almost to himself. "Damned inconvenient thing."